The ink was still wet on the envelope when Juliet Foster realized she was about to invite a stranger she'd never met to witness a marriage she wasn't sure she wanted. Her hand hovered over the address label, the P.O. box number memorized after 9 years of correspondence. Every month, like clockwork, she sent a letter to Box 847, and every month a reply arrived in handwriting that looked like it belonged to another century, all careful loops and deliberate strokes. They had never exchanged names, never traded photographs or phone numbers. The rules had been clear from the beginning, set by the anonymous ad she'd answered in the back of a literary magazine when she was 19. Write to someone who will never know your face. Tell the truth. And she had. God, she had told him everything. About her mother's slow decline from cancer, about changing her major 3 times, about the small humiliations of working retail while her friends climbed corporate ladders, about the creeping fear that she was becoming someone she didn't recognize. Things she had never told Marcus, her fiancé, who was currently arguing with the caterer in the next room about whether salmon or chicken made a better impression on his partners from the firm. Juliet set down the invitation and picked up the stack of letters she kept in a fabric-covered box beneath her desk. She shouldn't be reading them now, 3 weeks before the wedding, but her fingers found the ribbon that held them together anyway. The most recent one was dated 2 months ago. You wrote that you feel like a guest at your own life, the letter read in that same meticulous script. I have lived long enough to know that feeling well. We create performances for the people around us, and then one day, we wake to find the performance has calcified into a prison. But here's what I have also learned. The self you write is not a fantasy. It is the truth your dailiness drowns out. Listen to her. She is trying to save you. She had cried when she read it, then hidden the letter away and gone to a dress fitting where she smiled until her face hurt. Now she picked up her pen and addressed the invitation to Box 847, anonymous friend. Then she tore it in half. It was absurd. He was probably a 70-year-old retired professor or a lonely housewife in Ohio. The mystique would shatter the moment she saw him in daylight, and she needed the letters to stay sacred. They were the only place she had left that felt entirely hers. She finished the rest of the invitations in mechanical silence and delivered them to Marcus, who barely looked up from his laptop. "Did you remember my uncle's family?" he asked. "The Graysons. They're flying in from Europe. I thought you hadn't spoken to them in years." "I haven't, but my mother insists." He typed something with aggressive keystrokes. "Apparently there's some kind of nobility or old money or something. She wants to impress them." Juliet nodded and left him to his work. She had learned not to ask too many questions about Marcus's family. His mother was a cold, brittle woman who looked at Juliet like she was a wine stain on expensive upholstery, and his father had died when Marcus was young, leaving behind a tangle of estranged relatives no one ever explained. The wedding was in 3 weeks, and Juliet felt like she was swimming toward a shore that kept receding. The rehearsal dinner was held at a restaurant Marcus's mother had chosen, all white tablecloths and waiters who moved like shadows. Juliet sat between Marcus and his college roommate, smiling politely while the roommate recounted a story about Marcus winning a mock trial competition. Across the table, Marcus's mother presided over the gathering with the authority of a queen, directing conversation with lifted eyebrows and strategic silences. "The Graysons arrived this afternoon," she announced, cutting through the roommate's story. "They'll be at the ceremony tomorrow, of course. It's been too long since our families were in the same room." "I've never even met them," Marcus muttered. "You met Wolfgang when you were a child. You won't remember. He's—" She paused, selecting her words carefully. "Distinctive." Juliet caught the edge of something in her voice. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of reverence. It sat strangely on a woman who treated reverence like a weakness. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of toasts and laughter that sounded like wind chimes, pretty and hollow. Juliet drank too much wine and excused herself early, claiming a headache that wasn't entirely a lie. Marcus squeezed her hand distractedly and returned to a conversation about interest rates. In the taxi home, she pulled out her phone and almost texted her anonymous correspondent before remembering that they didn't have each other's numbers. She wanted to tell him that she felt like a bird in a cage made of wedding tulle. But instead, she opened her notes app and wrote it there, saving it for the next letter she would write but probably never send. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, as if the universe had decided to remove every possible excuse for calling it off. Juliet sat in the bridal suite while her maid of honor fussed with her veil, and her mother dabbed at tears that had started the moment Juliet put on the dress. "You look so beautiful," her mother whispered. "Your father would have been so proud." Juliet's father had died when she was 16, and she had spent the last decade trying to imagine what he would think of her choices. She suspected he would have liked Marcus's ambition and stability. He had been a practical man, an accountant who believed in 5-year plans and diversified portfolios, but he had also been the one who bought her books of poetry and told her that numbers only mattered if you knew what you were counting toward. 10 minutes, someone called from the hallway. Juliet's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her lap and tried to breathe the way the yoga instructor on YouTube had taught her. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It didn't help. Nothing helped except the thought of the letters, the stranger who knew her in a way that no one standing in this room did. She had written him one final letter last night, after the rehearsal dinner. She hadn't mailed it yet. It sat in her purse, sealed and stamped, waiting. "I don't know if I can do this," she had written. "Everyone keeps telling me that cold feet are normal, that doubt is just fear of happiness. But what if it's not? What if it's my instincts trying to tell me something I'm too scared to hear? You once wrote that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to listen to the right fear. I think I've been listening to the wrong ones. I'm afraid of disappointing people. I'm afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of admitting I made a mistake. But I'm most afraid of waking up in 5 years and realizing I chose safety over truth." She had signed it, as always, with just her initial. J. "It's time," her maid of honor said gently. Juliet stood. The dress weighed 1,000 pounds. The church was full of people she barely knew, colleagues of Marcus's and friends of his mother's, all of them dressed like they were attending a corporate gala. Juliet walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm, her eyes fixed on Marcus at the altar. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, his expression serious and focused, like he was about to deliver a closing argument. But then her gaze drifted past him, scanning the rows of guests, and she froze. There was a man sitting in the 3rd row on the groom's side, and he was staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was tall, impossibly so, with white hair that fell past his shoulders and skin so pale it seemed to glow against his black suit. His features were sharp and aristocratic, all high cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it had been carved from marble. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark, impossibly dark, and they were looking at her like he could see straight through the dress and the makeup and the performance, down to the terrified woman underneath. She stumbled slightly, and her uncle steadied her with a concerned murmur. She forced herself to keep walking, but her mind was spinning. Who was he? Why was he looking at her like that? And why did she feel like she knew him, despite being certain they had never met? The ceremony began. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, and Juliet repeated words she had memorized weeks ago. Marcus slid the ring onto her finger, and she was supposed to do the same, but her hands wouldn't move. "Juliet?" the officiant prompted gently. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him. He was frowning slightly, confused but not concerned, like she was a witness who had forgotten her lines. And in that moment, she realized that he didn't know her at all. He knew the version of her that smiled at dinner parties and laughed at his jokes and never challenged him on the things that mattered. He knew the performance, but he had never once asked to meet the woman underneath. "I can't," she whispered. The church went silent. "What?" Marcus's frown deepened. "I can't do this." Her voice was stronger now. "I'm sorry. I can't." She pulled off the engagement ring and pressed it into his hand, then turned and walked back down the aisle, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The guests stared, a sea of shocked faces, but she didn't look at any of them except for the white-haired man in the 3rd row. He was standing now, and as she passed him, he gave her the smallest nod, like a bow, and his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite approval, but felt like recognition. Then she was through the doors and running, the dress tangling around her legs, her veil coming loose and trailing behind her like a ghost. She ended up at a park 3 blocks from the church, sitting on a bench beneath a tree with her head in her hands. The dress was already grass-stained, and she had lost one of her shoes somewhere along the way, but she didn't care. For the first time in months, she could breathe. That was extraordinarily brave. She looked up. The white-haired man was standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Up close, he was even more striking, and there was something about him that felt ancient, like he carried centuries in the set of his shoulders. "Who are you?" she asked. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "I think you know." And then it clicked. The formal way he held himself, the old-fashioned cadence she could almost hear beneath his words, the way he had looked at her in the church like he knew every secret she had ever written. "Box 847, she breathed. He inclined his head. "Wolfgang Grayson. Though you have known me only as a patient listener and an occasionally adequate correspondent." Juliet felt the ground tilt beneath her. 9 years of letters, and he had been real the entire time, not a lonely stranger in Ohio, but this. A man who looked like he had stepped out of a Gothic painting, who moved with a predator's grace, who was somehow related to Marcus's estranged family. "You came to my wedding," she said stupidly. "I was invited by my distant relation, though he and I have not spoken in many years. I did not know you were the bride until I saw the name on the program." His voice was low and precise, each word carefully chosen. "I recognized your initial. And then, when you walked down the aisle, I recognized the way you held yourself, like you were bracing for an impact. You have described it in your letters." She should have felt violated. He had kept his identity secret for 9 years while she poured her heart out to him, and now he was standing in front of her, a stranger with her secrets. But instead, she felt something else entirely. Relief. Like she'd been holding her breath for 9 years and could finally exhale. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" she asked. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because what I am complicates everything." "What you are?" "I am not." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm not entirely human, Juliet, and I'm not a good man, though I have tried to be a good friend to you. If I had revealed myself, you would have asked questions I could not answer without changing the nature of our correspondence. I wanted to give you something uncomplicated, a place where you could be honest without consequence." She stood, her ruined dress rustling around her. "I don't understand." He finally looked at her again, and there was something raw in his expression, a crack in the aristocratic mask. "I am what your world calls a vampire. I have lived for 6 centuries, and for most of them I have ruled my kind as king. I am dangerous and old and bound by laws you cannot imagine. When I saw your advertisement 9 years ago, I answered it on a whim, thinking it would be a brief distraction. But you—" He stopped, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You wrote about the world with such earnest longing, such determination to find meaning in the small moments. I had forgotten what that felt like. So I kept writing, and I told myself it was harmless, that you would never know, and I could have this one thing that was not about power or blood or the endless weight of ruling." Juliet should have run. Every instinct she had should have been screaming at her to get away from the man who had just claimed to be a vampire, a king, a creature from nightmares. But she had spent 9 years learning to trust her instincts, and right now they were telling her to stay. "Prove it," she said. He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "What?" "Prove you're a vampire." For a long moment he just stared at her. Then, slowly, he stepped closer, moving with a fluid grace that was definitely not human. He reached up and pulled his lips back slightly, revealing teeth that were too sharp, canines that elongated as she watched, becoming fangs designed for tearing through flesh. She should have screamed. Instead, she leaned closer, studying them with a curiosity that surprised her. "Do they hurt?" He let his mouth return to normal, the fangs retracting. "No, they are simply a part of me." "And the sunlight thing, is that real?" "It is. I will burn if exposed for too long, though I will not crumble to dust as your films suggest. I am old enough to endure brief exposure, but it is not pleasant." "So you've been writing to me at night?" "Always at night, in my study, with the curtains drawn and the city asleep outside." She thought about that. About him sitting in some dark room, reading her letters by candlelight or lamplight, taking the time to craft responses that had shaped the last 9 years of her life. It should have felt creepy or predatory, but it didn't. It felt like exactly what he had said, A vampire, king, stealing moments of something simple and human in the midst of an immortal existence. "Why did you come today?" she asked. "Because I am a fool," he said quietly. "I told myself I would stay away, that seeing you would only make it harder to let you go. But then I was summoned to this wedding by family obligation, and I saw your name, and I could not resist. I wanted to see the woman whose words have been my solace for nearly a decade. I wanted to see if you were as remarkable in person as you were on paper." "And?" He looked at her with an expression that was almost sad. "You are more." Her heart was racing now, not with fear but with something else, something that felt like the moment before jumping off a high dive. "I left him. I left Marcus. I know. Because of your letters. Because you made me realize I was living a life someone else wrote for me." "You left him for yourself," Wolfgang corrected gently. "I only held up a mirror." "Don't diminish it." She took a step closer, and he went very still, like a wild animal deciding whether to bolt. "You saved me. You've been saving me for 9 years, one letter at a time." "Juliet?" Her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. "You do not know what you are saying. I am not some romantic figure from a novel. I am old and dangerous, and my world is full of violence and politics that would consume you. I don't care. You should. But I don't." She was close enough now to see the inhuman stillness of him, the way his chest barely moved because he didn't need to breathe the way she did. "I've spent my whole life being careful, being sensible, making the safe choice. And where did it get me? Standing at an altar next to a man who didn't even know my favorite color, because he'd never asked. You know things about me that I've never told anyone. You know what I think about at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep. You know the exact moment I fell out of love with my college boyfriend, and the reason I can't watch movies about dogs dying, and the way I feel about the smell of rain on pavement. You know me." "I do," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you, and you deserve more than a monster who cannot even walk in the sunlight beside you." "You're not a monster." "You do not know that." "Yes, I do, because monsters don't spend 9 years writing letters to a stranger just to make sure she knows she's not alone." He closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked almost human, vulnerable in a way that made her chest ache. "I have done terrible things, Juliet. I have lived for 600 years, and I have spilled more blood than you can imagine. I am a king because I was stronger and more ruthless than anyone who challenged me. I have made decisions that cost lives, and I have never lost sleep over them because that is what it means to rule. You have written to an idealized version of me, the part I showed you in careful letters, but the whole truth is darker than you know." "Then tell me," she said. "Not now, maybe, but eventually. Tell me all of it, the terrible and the beautiful, and let me decide what I can live with." He opened his eyes, and the look he gave her was devastating. "Why?" "Because in 9 years of letters, you never once lied to me. You never once made me feel small or stupid or less than. You challenged me and comforted me and saw me as a whole person, not just a role to fill. And maybe that's not everything, but it's more than I've ever had with anyone else." "You would give up the daylight?" "I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing something different." He reached out slowly, like he was afraid she might vanish, and touched her cheek with the tips of his fingers. His skin was cool, not cold, and his touch was so gentle it made her want to cry. "You are the most extraordinary person I have ever known," he said, "and I have known thousands." "Good opener," she managed, her voice shaky. "Now ask me to dinner." The corner of his mouth lifted, the first real expression of humor she had seen from him. "Would you like to have dinner with me, Juliet Foster? Tomorrow evening, after the sun has set?" "Yes," she said. "I would like that very much." He lowered his hand, stepping back with visible effort. "I should let you go. You have had a difficult day, and you need time to think clearly about this, about me, without the adrenaline of leaving a wedding." "I'm thinking clearly right now." "You are in shock. You just called off your wedding and discovered that your anonymous pen pal is a vampire. Give yourself time to process both of those things before you make any more decisions." She wanted to argue, but he was probably right. The whole day felt like a fever dream, and she was still wearing a grass-stained wedding dress in a public park. "Okay," she said, "but I'm not going to change my mind. We shall see." He pulled a card from his jacket and handed it to her. It was heavy stock, cream-colored, with an address embossed in gold. "My residence. Come tomorrow at 8 if you still wish to." She took the card, running her thumb over the raised letters. "I'll be there." He inclined his head in that same formal gesture, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between the trees with a speed that confirmed everything he had told her. She stood there for a long time, holding the card, her heart still racing. Then she pulled out her phone and called her maid of honor to come pick her up. She had a lot of explaining to do. The next 24 hours were chaos. Marcus called 6 times before Juliet blocked his number. His mother called twice, her voice dripping with venom about embarrassment and immaturity and lawsuits over the cost of the venue. Juliet's mother cried and asked if she was sure, then cried again when Juliet said yes, then finally whispered that she was proud of her, and hung up. The maid of honor, whose name was Tessa and who had been Juliet's best friend since college, came over with wine and ice cream and listened to the whole story, including the part about Wolfgang being a vampire. She didn't laugh or call Juliet crazy. She just nodded and said, "So are you going to dinner with him?" "I think so." "Good. Marcus was boring anyway." They spent the afternoon returning wedding gifts and drafting an apology email to the guests. Juliet felt like she should be more upset, more regretful, but mostly she just felt relief. The cage door was open, and she was flying. At 7 o'clock, she started getting ready. She had no idea what one wore to dinner with a vampire king, so she settled on a simple black dress and minimal makeup. Her hands were shaking as she applied lipstick, not from fear but from anticipation. It felt like the night before a trip to somewhere she'd always wanted to visit. The address on the card led to a building in the old part of the city, a converted mansion with wrought iron gates and windows that glowed with warm light. Juliet stood outside for a full minute, gathering her courage before she pressed the buzzer. The gate swung open silently, and she walked up the path to the front door. It opened before she could knock, and Wolfgang stood there, dressed in dark slacks and a white shirt that made his pale skin look even more ethereal. His hair was tied back, revealing the sharp lines of his face, and his expression when he saw her was something between relief and reverence. "You came," he said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I hoped, but I did not presume." He stepped aside to let her in, and she entered a space that was both modern and timeless. The floors were dark wood, the walls lined with bookshelves and art that looked original and old. There was a fireplace crackling in the corner, and furniture that managed to be elegant without being cold. It felt like a place someone actually lived, not a museum. "Your home is beautiful," she said. "Thank you. I have lived here for 30 years, which is long for me. I usually move every decade or so to avoid questions about why I do not age." He gestured toward a dining room visible through an archway. "I had dinner prepared for you. I hope you like Italian. You're not eating." "I cannot, not human food at least." "Right." Because he was a vampire. The reality of it settled over her again, strange and thrilling. She followed him into the dining room, where a single place was set at a table that could have seated 12. There was wine breathing in a decanter, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. "This feels unfair," she said. "You going to all this trouble and not being able to enjoy it. I enjoy watching you enjoy it." He pulled out her chair, and she sat, hyper-aware of his nearness. "I have not had a guest for dinner in a very long time." "Why not?" "Because most of my interactions are political in nature, and breaking bread is a human ritual that does not translate well to my kind. We have our own customs, our own ways of building trust, and they generally involve less pasta and more formal negotiation." She took a sip of the wine. It was excellent, rich, and complex. "Tell me about it. Your world, I mean. If we're doing this, whatever this is, I need to understand what I'm walking into." He sat across from her, folding his hands on the table. "That is fair. What do you wish to know?" "Everything. Start with the basics." So he did. He told her about the vampire courts, the ancient families that ruled different regions, the laws that governed their kind. He explained that he was king of the Eastern Court, which spanned from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River, and that he answered to no one except the Council of Elders, a group of vampires so old they barely remembered being human. He told her about blood laws, the strict rules about feeding and turning and territory, and the punishments for those who broke them. "It sounds medieval," Juliet said, twirling pasta on her fork. "It is. We are creatures of tradition. Change comes slowly to immortals." He paused. "But there are good things as well. We are capable of great beauty, great art, great loyalty. We protect our own fiercely, and we honor the bonds we make. I have friends I have known for centuries, and I would burn the world for them if necessary." "And what about love?" She asked it casually, but her heart was pounding. His expression softened. "Love is complicated for us. We do not age, do not change in the ways humans do. So when we love, it is often all-consuming. It has to be, to sustain across centuries. But it is also rare. Many of my kind go their entire existence without finding it." "Have you?" "Once," he said quietly. "A very long time ago. She was human, and she died of old age while I stayed young. I have not allowed myself to feel that way again since." Juliet set down her fork, her appetite fading. "I'm sorry." "Do not be. It was 300 years ago, and the pain has dulled to a memory. But it taught me something important, that loving a mortal is both a gift and a curse. Every moment is precious because it is finite, but the end is inevitable. I watched her gray and weaken, and eventually forget my name, and I could do nothing to stop it." "Is that why you didn't tell me who you were? Because you didn't want to go through that again?" "Partly, but also because I did not want to trap you in a choice you were not ready to make. If I had revealed myself years ago, you might have felt obligated to respond a certain way, or you might have run, and either option would have ended what we had. I was selfish. I wanted to keep the letters." She understood that. She had wanted to keep them too, the purity of words on paper without the complication of reality. But reality was here now, sitting across from her with dark eyes and centuries of history, and she found she didn't want to go back. I'm not her," Juliet said. "I'm not your lost love." "I know. And I'm not going to let you use her as an excuse to keep me at arm's length." His mouth quirked. "You are very direct. I learned it from your letters. You told me once that clarity was an act of kindness, especially in matters of the heart." "I did, didn't I?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You are formidable, Juliet Foster. I think you do not even realize how much." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I left my fiancé yesterday, discovered you're a vampire, and now I'm sitting in your house talking about blood laws and immortal politics. This is insane." "It is. But it also feels more real than anything else in my life right now." "I know that feeling as well." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling in the background. Then Juliet took a deep breath and asked the question that had been weighing on her since the park. "What happens now? You said you're a king, that your world is full of violence and politics. If this becomes something, what does that mean for me?" Wolfgang's expression turned serious. "It means you would be under my protection, which is not a small thing. No one in my court would dare harm you, and anyone outside it who tried would face my wrath. But it also means you would be pulled into a world you do not understand, surrounded by creatures who might see you as a weakness to exploit. I have enemies, Juliet. Many of them. And they would not hesitate to use you against me if they thought it would give them an advantage. That sounds dangerous. It is. But you think I'm worth the risk." He looked at her with an intensity that made her skin flush. "I know you are." She finished her wine, letting the warmth of it settle her nerves. "Okay, then we move forward. Slowly, carefully, but forward." "You're certain?" "No, but I'm certain I want to try." He stood and walked around the table, offering her his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet, and suddenly they were very close. Close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his dark eyes, the sharp lines of his face, the way his mouth was set in something between hope and caution. "I will not rush you," he said. "We will move at your pace, and if at any point you wish to stop, you need only say so." "And if I don't want to move slowly?" His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Then we will negotiate." She smiled despite herself. "How very diplomatic." "I have had 600 years to learn diplomacy." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was somehow more intimate than anything she had experienced with Marcus. But with you, I find I would rather be honest than diplomatic. Then be honest. What do you want from this? He lowered her hand but didn't let go. I want to know you in person the way I have known you through letters. I want to hear your voice when you laugh, and I want to be the reason you laugh. I want to take you to places you have only read about and watch you experience them for the first time. He paused, his jaw tightening. I want to be selfish and keep you, even though I know the cost. What cost? The cost of watching you age while I stay the same. The cost of knowing that even if we have 50 years together, it will feel like a blink to me. And then you will be gone. His voice was raw now, stripped of the formal cadence. I have been alone for a very long time, Juliet. I have friends, allies, subjects, but I have not had someone who knew me, truly knew me, since I lost her. And then you wrote that first letter, so earnest and searching, and I thought, here is someone who might understand. So I answered, and you wrote back. And for 9 years I have carried your letters with me like a talisman. They are in my study, locked in a drawer, every single one. I have memorized passages that struck me, and I have reread them on nights when ruling felt like a burden too heavy to carry. You have been my solace without even knowing it. And now you are here, in my home, and I am terrified that I will ruin this the way I ruin everything I try to hold on to. Juliet's eyes were stinging. She reached up with her free hand and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. You're not going to ruin this. You cannot know that. Maybe not, but I trust you. I've trusted you for 9 years, and I'm not going to stop now. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them again, there was something vulnerable there, something that looked almost like fear. I do not deserve you. That's not your decision to make. It's mine, and I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that was both gentle and desperate. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the faint, slow beat of his heart. It was there, but muted, like an echo. I will protect you, he murmured into her hair. With everything I am, I will keep you safe. I know. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the firelight, and Juliet felt something settle in her chest, a rightness she had never felt with Marcus or anyone else. This was what the letters had been building toward, this moment of recognition, of two people who had known each other in words finally meeting in flesh. Eventually, Wolfgang pulled back, his hands still resting on her waist. It is late. I should take you home. I can take a cab. Absolutely not. I will drive you. She didn't argue. She was starting to realize that his protectiveness was not about control, but about care, a deeply ingrained instinct to keep safe the things he valued. It should have bothered her, but it didn't. It felt like being cherished. He drove a sleek black car that was probably worth more than her annual salary, and they talked the whole way back to her apartment, easy conversation about books and music and the city. When he pulled up outside her building, he walked her to the door, old-fashioned in a way that made her heart ache. When can I see you again? She asked. Whenever you wish. I'm at your disposal. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, he agreed. I will take you somewhere you will enjoy. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, a brief press of lips that made him go very still. Then she stepped back, smiling. Good night, Wolfgang. Good night, Juliet. She went inside and watched from her window as he drove away, disappearing into the night. Then she sat down at her desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. Dear anonymous friend, she wrote, even though she knew his name now. I met you today. Well, technically yesterday, but it feels like today because I haven't slept yet. You were right about so many things, but you were wrong about one. You are not going to ruin this. We're going to figure it out together, one letter, one conversation, one moment at a time. She sealed it, addressed it to Box 847 out of habit, and set it on her desk. She would give it to him in person next time. It felt right, continuing the letters even now that they were no longer anonymous. They had started this with words, and words would always be part of their language. The next 3 months unfolded like a slow dance, each step deliberate and careful. Wolfgang took her to art galleries and late-night bookstores, to concerts where the music was played by vampires who had been perfecting their craft for centuries, to hidden gardens that only bloomed under moonlight. He introduced her to parts of the city she had never known existed, places where his world and hers overlapped in strange and beautiful ways. He was careful with her, always asking permission before touching her, always making sure she felt safe. But he was also surprisingly playful, with a dry sense of humor that came out when she least expected it. He told her stories about history he had lived through, about wars and revolutions and moments that had changed the world. He taught her things about art and literature and music that no textbook could have captured, because he had been there when they were created. And slowly, carefully, she fell in love with him. It wasn't the wild, passionate love of movies and novels. It was quieter than that, built on conversations that lasted until dawn, and the way he listened to her like every word mattered. It was the way he remembered small details from her letters, bringing her tea made the exact way she liked it, or buying her a book she had mentioned wanting to read years ago. It was the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in his very long life. But there were hard parts too. She met some of his court, vampires who looked at her with thinly veiled contempt or curiosity, and she felt the weight of their judgment. She learned about the politics, the constant maneuvering for power and influence, and she saw the moments when Wolfgang had to be a king instead of the man who wrote her letters. Those moments were cold and hard, and they reminded her that he had lived a life before her, that he had made choices and sacrifices she could barely imagine. One night, about 2 months in, they were sitting in his study, surrounded by books in the soft glow of lamps, when she asked him the question that had been nagging at her. "Have you thought about what happens long term? With us, I mean." He looked up from the book he was reading, his expression carefully neutral. "I think about it constantly." And I do not have a good answer." He closed the book and set it aside. "You will age, Juliet. In 10 years you will start to show it, and in 20 it will be undeniable. People will notice that I do not age with you, and they will ask questions. We could move, start over somewhere new every decade, but that is a hard life, always running, always hiding. What's the alternative?" His jaw tightened. "I could turn you, make you what I am. You would stop aging, and we would have centuries together instead of decades." She had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud still made her chest tighten. "Do you want that?" "What I want is irrelevant. This is your choice, your life. I will not take that from you." "But if I asked your opinion?" He was silent for a long moment, his hands folded in his lap. Then he said, quietly, "I am terrified of losing you. I lost her, my first love, and it nearly destroyed me. The thought of going through that again, of watching you fade while I remain, is unbearable. So yes, selfishly, I want you to choose to turn. I want centuries with you. But I also know what it costs to become what I am. You would lose the sun, the simple pleasures of human food, the ability to have children. You would outlive everyone you love, except for me. And I do not know if I could live with myself if you came to regret that choice." Juliet stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted. "Part of me is curious, part of me is terrified, and part of me thinks that maybe the finite time is what makes it valuable. If we had forever, would we take each moment for granted?" "Perhaps, but I would rather risk taking you for granted than lose you entirely." She turned to look at him. "That's not comforting." "I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to be honest." She appreciated that, even if it made things harder. She walked back to him and sat on the arm of his chair, running her fingers through his hair. "Can we table this for now? I need more time to think." "Of course." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "We have time. Not infinite, but enough." That night, he kissed her for the first time, a slow, gentle kiss that tasted like possibility. His hands were steady on her waist, his mouth careful, like he was afraid of breaking her. She kissed him back with all the longing she had been carrying for months, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. "I have wanted to do that since the park," he admitted. "What took you so long?" "Cowardice, mostly." She laughed and kissed him again, and this time it was less gentle, more urgent. He responded in kind, his control slipping just enough that she felt the edge of the passion he had been holding back. It was intoxicating and terrifying and perfect. 4 months after the wedding that never happened, Marcus called her. She had unblocked his number weeks ago, mostly because she felt bad about how things had ended, and when she saw his name on her screen, she almost didn't answer. But curiosity won out. "Hello? Juliet, it's Marcus." "I know." There was a pause. "How are you?" "I'm good. You?" "I'm fine. Listen, I wanted to apologize for how I handled things, for not seeing that you were unhappy. I've had a lot of time to think, and I realize I wasn't a very good partner to you." She sat down, surprised. "Thank you. That means a lot. I heard you're seeing someone, the guy from the wedding, the one with the white hair. How did you hear that?" "My mother. She keeps tabs on things." He sounded embarrassed. "She's still furious, by the way, but I told her to let it go." "Thank you. Is it serious? With him, I mean." She thought about Wolfgang, about the way he looked at her like she hung the moon, about the letters they still wrote to each other even though they saw each other nearly every day. "Yes, very serious." "Good. I hope he makes you happy, Juliet. You deserve that. You deserve it too, Marcus." They talked for a few more minutes, awkward but kind, and when they hung up, Juliet felt a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. Marcus wasn't a bad person, he just hadn't been the right person, and now they could both move forward. That night she told Wolfgang about the call, and he listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "Do you have regrets?" he asked when she finished. "About leaving him? No, about how I left him? Maybe a little, but I think we're both better off. You were generous to think of his well-being. I spent 3 years with him. I don't want him to be miserable just because I couldn't go through with the wedding." Wolfgang pulled her onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her. "You are kinder than I would be in your position. Well, you've had 600 years to hold grudges. I'm still new at this." He laughed, a sound she had grown to love because it was so rare. "Fair enough." 6 months in, Juliet met Wolfgang's closest friends, a group of vampires who had known him for centuries. There was Lucian, a dark-haired vampire with a wicked sense of humor who claimed to have fought in the Crusades. There was Seraphine, a stunning woman with silver eyes who had been turned during the Renaissance and spoke 6 languages fluently. And there was Matthias, a quiet, thoughtful vampire who had been Wolfgang's advisor for over 200 years. They met at Wolfgang's home, and Juliet was nervous enough that she had changed her outfit 3 times before settling on a simple dress and heels. Wolfgang had assured her that they would like her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being evaluated, judged against centuries of history she couldn't compete with. But they were kind. Lucian teased Wolfgang mercilessly about being domesticated, and Seraphine asked Juliet about her work at the bookstore where she had started working after leaving her retail job. Matthias was more reserved, but he watched her with an appraising eye that felt more curious than hostile. "So you are the famous letter writer," Lucian said, pouring himself a glass of wine that Juliet suspected was not wine at all. "Wolfgang has told us very little, which means you are important." "I am sitting right here," Wolfgang said dryly. "Yes, and it is delightful to see you squirm." Lucian turned back to Juliet. "He has been insufferable for months, mooning about like a lovesick poet. It is refreshing to finally meet the cause." "I do not moon," Wolfgang said. "You absolutely do," Seraphine said, her tone amused. "You have been distracted and absent-minded and completely useless at court functions. Matthias had to handle the last 3 disputes himself because you were too busy thinking about her to pay attention." Wolfgang looked mildly embarrassed, and Juliet couldn't help but smile. "I like them," she whispered to him. "I am glad because they are never leaving." The evening passed in a blur of stories and laughter, and by the end of it, Juliet felt like she had been welcomed into something rare and precious. These were Wolfgang's people, his family, and they had accepted her without hesitation. It made the idea of his world feel less intimidating and more like a place she could belong. Later, after the others had left, Wolfgang walked her to the door, his hand resting on the small of her back. "They liked you," he said. "I liked them too. Lucian wants to take you to Paris. Apparently he thinks I'm not showing you enough of the world." "Are you?" He tilted his head, considering. "Perhaps not. I have been selfish, keeping you to myself. I don't mind. Still, would you like to travel? See places you have only read about? With you. Of course with me. I'm not letting you go anywhere without me. She smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Then yes, I would love that. They went to Paris in the spring, and Wolfgang showed her the city through the eyes of someone who had watched it grow and change for centuries. He took her to museums after hours, using his influence to gain access when the crowds were gone, and he told her stories about the artists who had created the works they admired. He took her to old cafes where he had spent nights debating philosophy with revolutionaries, and he walked her along the Seine under the stars. It was the most romantic week of her life, and by the end of it, she knew she was going to say yes when he eventually asked her to stay with him forever. Not yet, but soon. She wanted a little more time as herself, as human, before she made that choice. She wanted to memorize the feeling of the sun on her skin and the taste of chocolate and the simple rhythm of her heartbeat, so that when she gave them up, she would know exactly what she was trading them for. Wolfgang seemed to sense her decision without her saying it aloud. He didn't press, didn't ask, just held her hand a little tighter and kissed her a little longer, like he was trying to memorize her too. 8 months after the wedding, Juliet moved in with Wolfgang. It was a practical decision as much as a romantic one. She was spending most nights at his house anyway, and her apartment lease was up. But it also felt significant, like crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. She brought her books and her clothes and the box of letters they had written to each other, and Wolfgang cleared out a room for her to use as a study. He had bookshelves installed and a desk positioned by the window, and he filled the room with things he thought she would like. A reading lamp, a plush chair, a plant that didn't need much sunlight. You didn't have to do all this, she said, running her hand along the edge of the desk. I wanted you to have a space that was yours. I know this is my home, but I want it to feel like yours as well. She turned and kissed him, grateful and overwhelmed and so deeply in love it hurt. Thank you. They settled into a routine. She worked at the bookstore during the day, and he handled court business at night, and they met in the in-between hours, sharing meals and conversations and the quiet intimacy of coexisting in the same space. She learned his habits, the way he read with his fingers tracing the words, the way he listened to music with his eyes closed, the way he always made sure she was comfortable before worrying about himself. And he learned hers, the way she hummed when she was focused, the way she curled up in the corner of the couch with a blanket, the way she always checked on him when he came home from court, reading his mood in the set of his shoulders. It was domestic and ordinary, and everything she had never had with Marcus. It was real. A year after the wedding that never was, Wolfgang took her back to the park where they had first spoken face to face. It was late, the city quiet around them, and they sat on the same bench where she had collapsed in her wedding dress. Do you remember this? He asked. Of course. I was a mess. You were brave. She leaned her head on his shoulder, looking up at the stars. I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was falling. You were. But you chose to fall toward something instead of away from it. That takes courage. They sat in silence for a while, and then Wolfgang reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Juliet's heart started to race. I am not asking you to marry me, he said quickly. Not yet, at least, but I wanted to give you this. He opened the box, revealing a ring. It was silver, delicate, with a stone that glowed faintly in the moonlight. It is a promise, he said. A promise that I will be here for as long as you want me. A promise that I will protect you and cherish you and do everything in my power to make you happy. And a promise that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be waiting. Juliet took the ring with shaking hands and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It's beautiful. It belonged to my mother. She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to someone who mattered. You are the only person I have ever wanted to give it to. She looked up at him, her eyes stinging. I love you. I love you too, more than I thought I was capable of. They kissed under the stars, and Juliet felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 18 months after the wedding, Juliet made her decision. She was sitting in her study, writing a letter to Wolfgang, even though he was just downstairs, when she realized she didn't want to wait anymore. She wanted forever with him, whatever that looked like. She found him in his study, reading by lamplight, and she sat on his desk, forcing him to look at her. "I want to turn," she said. He went very still. "Are you certain?" "Yes. I've thought about it, and I know what I'm giving up, but I also know what I'm gaining. I want centuries with you, Wolfgang. I want to see the world change and grow old together, even if old means something different for us. I want this." He stood slowly, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You understand there is no going back. Once it is done, you will be what I am for the rest of existence." "I know. And you are certain this is what you want, not what you think I want." "I'm certain. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you, all of it, however long that is." His eyes were bright, almost glassy, and she realized with a start that he was close to crying, if vampires could cry. "You have given me a gift I did not think I would ever receive again," he said, his voice rough. "I will spend the rest of our existence trying to be worthy of it." "You already are." He kissed her then, deep and fierce and full of promise. And when they pulled apart, he asked, "When?" "Soon. I want to tell my mother first, and Tessa, I need to say goodbye to the sun. Then we will do it your way, on your timeline. I am not going anywhere." But Juliet told her mother over coffee, and her mother cried, but not in the way Juliet expected. "I thought I was losing you," her mother said. "When you called off the wedding, when you started seeing him, I thought you were running away from your life. But you're not. Are you? You're running toward it." "I am. And you're happy?" "Happier than I've ever been." Her mother hugged her tightly. "Then I'm happy for you. Just promise you'll visit, even if you can't come during the day." "I promise." Tessa took the news with her usual pragmatism. "So you're going to be a vampire? That's wild." "I know. But you're sure?" "I'm sure. Then I'm happy for you, and also extremely jealous that you're going to stay young and hot forever while I turn into a wrinkled old lady." Juliet laughed. "I'll still visit you when you're a wrinkled old lady." "You better." Putain. The turning happened on a night in late autumn, 2 years after the wedding that never was. Wolfgang had explained the process carefully, making sure she understood that it would hurt, that it would feel like dying because in a way, it was. But Juliet was ready. They were in his bedroom, the curtains drawn, candles flickering on every surface. Wolfgang had asked if she wanted his friends there, but she had said no. This felt private, intimate, something that should be just between them. He sat beside her on the bed, his expression serious. "Last chance to change your mind." "I'm not changing my mind." "Then lie back and trust me." She did, her heart pounding. He leaned over her, his hand cradling the back of her head, and he kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "I will be here the entire time," he murmured. "You will not be alone." Then he bit her neck, and the world exploded into pain. It felt like fire in her veins, like every cell in her body was being rewritten. She screamed, or thought she did, and Wolfgang held her through it, his voice a constant murmur of reassurance. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was enough. He was there. He wouldn't leave her. The pain lasted hours, or maybe minutes, or maybe days. Time stopped meaning anything. But eventually, it faded, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. Her senses sharpened, sounds and smells intensifying until the world felt almost overwhelming. She could hear Wolfgang's heartbeat, slow and steady, and the rustle of fabric as he shifted beside her. "Juliet," he said softly, "open your eyes." She did, and the world was different. Colors were more vivid, details sharper. She could see the individual threads in the fabric of the curtains, the dust motes floating in the air. And Wolfgang, he was still beautiful, but now she could see the ancient weight in his eyes, the centuries he carried. "How do you feel?" he asked. She sat up slowly, testing her new body. Everything felt stronger, more controlled. "Strange. Good strange, but strange. That will fade. Give it time." She looked at her hands, turning them over. Her skin was paler now, the same white as his. "I'm really a vampire." "You are." She looked up at him, and he was watching her with an expression that was almost fearful, like he was waiting for her to regret it. She reached out and pulled him down to her, kissing him with a fierceness she hadn't known she was capable of. "Thank you," she whispered against his mouth. "For what?" "For waiting. For letting me choose. For loving me enough to give me time." He kissed her back, his hands tangling in her hair. "I would have waited centuries for you. Good thing you didn't have to. I didn't either." The first few months as a vampire were an adjustment. Juliet had to learn to control her strength, to manage the hunger, to navigate the politics of Wolfgang's court now that she was one of them. But Wolfgang was patient, and his friends were helpful, and slowly she found her footing. She quit her job at the bookstore, which was bittersweet, but she couldn't risk being seen during the day anymore. Instead, she started working with Matthias, helping to manage some of the court's administrative work. It turned out she had a knack for organization and negotiation, skills that translated surprisingly well to vampire politics. Wolfgang was openly proud of her, which made navigating the court easier. No one questioned her place at his side, and those who might have were smart enough to keep their opinions to themselves. She was the vampire king's consort, and that came with a certain level of respect and protection. But the best part was the time they had together. Without the limitation of her human lifespan, they could make plans that stretched decades into the future. They talked about traveling the world, about the places Wolfgang wanted to show her and the things he wanted to teach her. They talked about building a life that was uniquely theirs, a blend of his ancient world and her modern sensibilities. And they still wrote letters. Even though they lived together, even though they could speak face to face whenever they wanted, they kept the tradition alive. Juliet would leave notes on his desk, and he would reply in that same careful script, and it felt like coming full circle. They had started with words, and words would always be their foundation. 3 years after the wedding that never was, Wolfgang proposed. They were in the study, surrounded by books in the soft glow of lamps, and he got down on one knee like a character from one of the historical novels Juliet loved. "I know I gave you a ring already," he said, "but I want to make it official. Will you marry me, Juliet Foster? Will you let me spend the rest of existence trying to make you happy?" She pulled him to his feet and kissed him. Yes. 1,000 times yes. They were married in a small ceremony attended by Wolfgang's friends and Juliet's mother and Tessa. It was nothing like the wedding she had almost had with Marcus. It was intimate and quiet, full of people who actually mattered to them. Juliet wore a simple dress and Wolfgang wore a suit that made him look like he had stepped out of a painting, and they exchanged vows under the stars in the garden behind his house. Lucian officiated, because of course he did, and he managed to make the ceremony both heartfelt and ridiculous, which was very on brand. Seraphine cried, which surprised everyone, and Matthias gave a toast that was so eloquent it made Juliet tear up. But the best moment was when Wolfgang slid the wedding band onto her finger, right next to the ring he had given her in the park, and he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. "I love you," he said, simple and true. "I love you too." They kissed, and the small gathering applauded, and Juliet felt like her heart might burst from happiness. 5 years after the wedding that never was, they moved into a new house. It was bigger than Wolfgang's old place, with more rooms and more bookshelves, and a garden that Juliet was determined to fill with night-blooming flowers. They spent weeks unpacking, organizing their combined collection of books and art and the letters they had written to each other over the years. The letters had their own room now, a small study lined with shelves where they kept them in chronological order. Juliet liked to go in there sometimes and pull one at random, reading words from years ago and remembering the person she had been when she wrote them. Wolfgang found her there one evening, sitting on the floor with a letter from 9 years ago spread out in front of her. "What are you reading?" he asked, settling beside her. "The first letter you ever sent me. Listen to this. You asked what it means to live an honest life. I think it means paying attention to the small moments of truth that punctuate our days, the moments when we feel most ourselves. It means protecting those moments, even when the world tries to erase them." She looked up at him. "You were right. That's exactly what I was looking for." He took the letter from her, reading it with a small smile. "I was pretentious, even then. You were wise. You still are." "I'm old. There is a difference." She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Answering that first letter? Never, do you? Not even for a second?" They sat in the quiet of the letter room, surrounded by years of words and the promise of more to come. Outside, the city hummed with life, but in here, it was just the two of them, a vampire king and the woman who had written to a stranger and found a home. "What should we write about next?" Juliet asked. Wolfgang considered. "How about this? You write to me about the future you imagine for us, and I will write to you about the past I want to share with you." "That sounds perfect." And so they did. They kept writing, kept building a life out of words and trust and love that had started in anonymity and grown into something neither of them had expected, but both of them treasured. They had centuries ahead of them, and they would fill every one of them with letters and laughter and the quiet joy of being known. In the end, Juliet had left a wedding she didn't want and found a love she couldn't have imagined. She had become something she never thought possible, and she had done it on her own terms, in her own time. And Wolfgang, who had lived for 600 years alone, had finally found someone who saw him not as a king or a monster, but as a person worth knowing. They were happy. Not perfectly, not without challenges, but deeply, truly happy. And that was more than either of them had ever hoped for. The letters continued, one after another, year after year, a conversation that would last as long as they did. And in a house lined with bookshelves, surrounded by the words that had brought them together, they built a life that was entirely their own.